Hello makers, I'm Catherine Harris, Swiss Shear Stitchery, and today I am going to share with you a super quick and very easy and beginner friendly sewing tutorial, and that is how to make a sweater cape. So I have used the pattern, the sweater cape from Rebecca Page, and it has an option for both a sleeved version as well as a sleeveless version for this cape. And it really is kind of a cross between a poncho and a cape and a sweater, but it is oh so cozy, and I really like to use this especially in the transition months of fall and right before spring, where the weather is too warm to put on a nice warm winter coat, but still too chilly to go out with bare sleeves. It is a nice layering piece that is still really chic. So let's get into it. So to start off, we're going to cut out the pattern. So you want to use a fabric that has ideally 4-way stretch. Now this one does, but it stretches one way a little bit more than the other. So you want to pay attention to the degree of greatest stretch, which is where it stretches the most. So what I'm doing here is I am laying my fabric out in a single layer. Because I am using stripes, if I were to cut this on the fold, I might have some stripes that weren't lined up quite correctly. So once I have a single layer down, then I am just going to go about tracing out my pattern. Because the pattern piece is meant to be cut on the fold, I just need to be cognizant of that. So I flipped it upside down and I am lining the bottom hem up with the bottom stripe here. I'm also paying attention to where the stripe lies on the center front here. And once I have that done, and apologies that it is off camera, I did place a couple of pins along that center line, because once we are done making those notches, I am going to remove my pattern weights and I'm going to pull the fabric and the pattern piece down. So you can see that I am just pulling it down so that we can get the other side of this pattern piece. You don't want to cut down the side because it is cut on the fold here. So the next thing that we need to do is place that pattern piece on flipped over the right way, and you can see that I'm lining up my center of the pattern with those pins, as well as lining up that bottom line with the stripe to make sure everything is congruent along here. I am also going to be pinning this pattern in place so that I can manipulate that bottom along the stripe to make sure everything is nice and straight. Once I have it where I want it, I am just going to go ahead and place my pattern weights back on and then use my rotary cutter to cut out the remainder of the pattern piece. And then I can take out the pins and add in any of the notches that I need. And you can see that this piece is all done with a nice center front stripe going down the center and nice horizontal lines across the bottom. So next, I am going to show you that the degree of greatest stretch is the area that I have folded here. So these are for the cuffs. And so our dogs are the degree of greatest stretch, which is not listed on this pattern. It has the grain line, but in fact, my fabric dogs are going in the opposite direction of the grain line. So in a knit pattern, the grain line does not mean as much as the dogs. Because if I were to cut it in the direction of the grain line, it would not stretch nearly as much because it doesn't stretch as much in that degree. Now for the front hemband. So with this, you just need to cut out your pattern piece and then place wrong sides together. And I am going to place a clip on one end, and then I am going to clip the other side, do the center, and then just divide up that. And then we are going to attach this to the bottom of both the front and the back. So you will have two hembands. And ideally you would match up the stripes, but unfortunately I did not grab enough fabric to match up the stripes for my hemband. I was not thinking, so mine are mismatched, so do be sure to grab enough fabric there. I start by placing either ends together, and then I just go ahead and distribute my clips, and I am using clips because I find that it holds the sweater knit fabrics a lot better than pins. Pins do tend to slip out, even those ballpoint pins. And then we're going to stitch along here. And in my instance, I stitched as well as serged the edges. So next, we really want to make sure that this band lies nicely. And the key to that is pressing it. So once we've done the front and the back, take it over to your pressing table and we are going to press these seams with the seam pointing upwards. And so I'm just using a decent amount of steam, and even on a slinky sweater knit like this makes all the difference in how it lies. I also like to go ahead and go on the front of this and actually press down and really get a nice crisp crease along the bottom of that hemline. So you can see it matches up on the one side, but on the other side, it does not match up. Now for the shoulder seams. So with our shoulder seams, we have 2 notches on here. And we are going to place our shoulder seams front and back, right sides together. We're going to clip at either side and make sure that we also clip along those notch marks, matching them up perfectly. Now these notches are in particular for the version that has the sleeves. If you're not doing the sleeves, you don't have to worry about this. You're going to stitch between those notches and leave an opening in between them. And I'm going to do the same to the other side. So it should look like this. So let me flip this right side out so you can see. And you can see along the shoulder here, we have it stitched and then we have an opening and then it's stitched right along the end. Now for the sleeves. So with our sleeves, we are just going to place it right sides together and clip along the bottom underarm of the sleeve. And then you are just going to head on over to your sewing machine and you're going to stitch that and do that for both sets of sleeves. So in my instance, I did serge it as well. Next, we are going to quarter the top portion of the sleeve, which is the widest portion. So just go ahead and find the center and then quarter that so that you have 4 marks that are exactly evenly distributed. Just like so. And once we have that, we are going to attach it to the front of the sweater cape, but we want to quarter that as well. So with those 2 seams that we had stitched along the shoulder seam, those can be quarter points. We're going to match them together and then clip a small notch on either side. This evenly distributes those quarter points. Now the first thing to note is that the larger side is where it's going to get attached at the shoulder, and the more narrow side of the sleeve is where your wrist and cuff will go. Match up the bottom of the sleeve seam with that outer seam on the cape. And so I'm just matching that up right here. And then the notch right opposite to that seam is going to match up to the other seam on the sweater cape. And so I'm just matching that up right here. And then I go ahead and match up the other 2 notches in those quarter points and then add in a couple extra clips just to make sure nothing slips around. And then you're going to stitch and serge around the edge. Now, if you don't have an overlocker, you could also zigzag or just use a stretch stitch because knit fabric does not fray. And our sleeves will look just like so. And now for the sleeve cuffs. So with our sleeve cuffs, we are going to place them right sides together and then stitch on the short side here, right along the edges. And then I am just going to mark the halfway point on the opposite side of the seam on both the top and the bottom. And this is really going to help us when we fold our cuff right side out to make sure everything is lined up nicely and isn't twisted. So we're going to do the exact same thing on the sleeve itself where we're marking that halfway point. If you really wanted to, you could quarter this as well, but seeing as it's a smaller area, doing it just in half works perfectly fine as well. So I'm just clipping along the notch as well as the seam, and then I am going to place right sides together with the band as well as the sleeve, and I'm going to match up the underseam as well as the notch. And then I'm going to add a couple extra clips just inside here before we pop on over to the sewing machine, stitch it up, and I always like to finish it with an overlocker as well. And this is what it will look like, and you can give that a good press once that is all done. Now for the side bands. Now the side bands here, you'll have 2 of them, one for either side. Place it right sides together, and along the short end, we are going to clip the sides And you're going to do that for both sides because we need to finish those edges. And then we are going to head on over to our sewing machine and stitch them up. And so you're going to stitch it up for one side and of course for the other side band as well. Be very careful that you don't twist the fabric in that process as well. And once that is done, we can turn this right side out so that both the wrong sides are facing one another. And it's a bit long, so it can be a little tricky, but then go ahead and place a couple clips along that band just to hold everything in place. I like to match up my stripes. Now, if you don't have stripes, you can just make sure that everything is lying quite nicely, or you could attach notches at that prior step when you're cutting it out. So once you have that placed together, you are going to go ahead and attach the bands to the sweater cape. So the fold of the band should go along both bottom sides of your sweater cape, the front and the back on the corresponding side. And then you are going to have a notch that is going to denote that underarm seam where we had attached the sleeve. If you're not doing sleeves, it will just be that shoulder seam that you are going to match up. And then go ahead and add in any additional clips along this band and repeat this process for both sides. And then you can head on over to the sewing machine and overlocker to permanently attach this in place. You should not have to stretch anything out. This should fit absolutely perfectly. So get that stitched on both sides. And once that is done, it should look like this. And I did give it a good press, pressing my seam allowances towards the band. And then when I flip it right side out, it will look just like so. And in this instance, it can be a little difficult to match up those stripes, so I wouldn't worry too much about it. Now for the roll neck or the turtleneck. So with this piece, we are going to fold it where both of the short sides are together. And we're going to place it right sides together, and then we are going to stitch down here. Now make sure you use a stretch stitch or an overlocker. Next, I am just marking the halfway point, and then I'm going to match up that halfway notch with the seam to mark my quarter points. And you're going to want to do this on both the top of your roll neck as well as the bottom of the roll neck, just to make sure that nothing gets twisted when we fold this in half. So then we are going to fold it in half with wrong sides together so that you have the exterior fashion fabric on both the inside and the outside of your roll neck. Match up all of the notches with some clips to hold it in place when we go to attach it to the neckline. So then you're going to grab your sweater cape and we are going to attach it to the neckline. Now the neckline has a scoop in the front and a little less of a scoop in the back, meaning it is not going to be completely centered. So you're going to mark your center front and your center back. These two notches will denote part of the quarter-way mark, but we can't use those shoulder seams because it is not entirely center. So match up the center front and center back and mark some new notches. If you were to use those shoulder seams, your neck piece is not going to lie nice. You're going to have it bunching up in the front and too loose in the back. So the next thing that you need to do is attach that roll neck to the sweater. I like to use the center back seam on the roll neck to attach to the center back of my sweater cape. So I'm doing that one first, and then I like to go to the center front and match up those two notches, and then I go and do the side notches, not those side seams. And then you can distribute the remaining fabric using some clips, and then head on over to your sewing machine, stitch it in place, and then do a round of overlocking stitches or perhaps a zigzag stitch just to hold everything in place. You want it to be stretchy because this will stretch to go over your head. So you don't want to use just a straight stitch on your sewing machine. And then get that stitched nicely. Once it is done, you can turn it right side out, give it a nice good press, and I like to fold it in half. Now for adding the decorative buttons. So in this instance, I am adding decorative buttons just along the front. You can actually add functional buttons that will close the side of your sweater cape, but I wanted a bit more of a drapey feel, and I like the buttons lower. So I'm just attaching these by hand. If you were using functional buttons, you would place them higher just under your armpits so that it actually closes in the sides, but where I'm stitching them is a lot lower. It is just on the hemband because I like the look of this, and it also helps to give a bit of weight to this sweater because I'm using some metal buttons and a slightly drapier fabric. And now for the reveal.
Let it go, what's the use in holding on? Can we find a way where we could spend some time alone? You know where to find me, you know which way to go. As long as you love me, we'll be singing all night long.
Now, like I said, that was very quick to stitch up. I think I made mine in less than half an hour, and that was including filming. And I'm sure that if you are a beginner sewist, that you will have no issues stitching this up. And it is a great introduction to sewing with knits because you have a lot of straight seams. Now, one thing, if I was doing this again, I probably would have bought a little extra fabric so that I could do some pattern matching on those bands. When I had originally grabbed this fabric, I didn't think about the stripes and having to pattern match the bands, and I didn't have enough fabric to go in and do that. So if you are going to be working with a fabric that does have some stripes in it, I would be very cognizant of that and getting a little extra fabric. And I know it always says that on the back of the pattern envelope, but how many times do you ever really think about that when you're in the fabric store and you find this gorgeous fabric and you're like, how many meters do I need? Okay, I need, 2.8, and you buy it. So do make sure that you grab a little extra to match those stripes if you do have to match that pattern. But other than that, I really enjoyed making this, and I think it turned out much better than even the line drawings give it credit for. And I know I am going to get a ton of wear out of this. So if you have made any sort of poncho or sweater cape, I would love to know what patterns are your favorite in the comments down below, or if you have any other patterns that you would like a sew along for, do let me know. Until next time, makers, let's get our sewspiration on.